Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about the question of how many words are there in a novel. This was inspired by a student of mine, and I did a little bit of digging and also looked into how many words are in, for example, a short story, a novella, and also flash fiction. All these sort of different forms of writing, and there are some fairly concrete ideas, surprisingly, about the length of these different forms. Generally speaking, flash fiction, which is like a very, very short story with a bit more kind of poetry thrown in, or at least poetic language, is anything from a couple of hundred words up to 1,000 words. A short story usually tends to be around 1,000 words up to 10,000, although the kind of 4,000 word mark tends to be a little bit more common these days with competitions and anthologies kind of usually looking around that much. And then you have this kind of intermediate form, which is the novella. And that usually sits around the 40,000 word mark. And then after that, you've got novels, which are roughly 60,000 to 100,000 words long. But then it gets a little bit more complicated once you break down into genre, because the tendency for historical fiction and fantasy and sci-fi means that those sort of books can be sort of around 125,000 words long. Although most editors and most agents will kind of look to cut it down a little bit. And I was reading about sort of why this is the case, and it's generally believed because of tradition. Historically, this is how long novels have been, and it's what people expect. But also there's a view that if you're going kind of above 125,000 words, then potentially the pace of what you're writing might be a little bit off. It might be a bit too slow, a bit too much description, a bit too much detail. And as I was kind of digging into these questions, quite an intriguing thought arose from kind of the reading that I was doing, which was that definitions are very unhelpful, that they cram writers into boxes, they stifle creativity, and really they're not helpful for anybody. And I spent some time kind of pondering this idea of whether limitations or definitions stifle creativity. And I think they can do, but ultimately something like a strict word count, for example, 100,000 words maximum, is really can often enable creativity. You have a goal to work towards, you have a very clear benchmark, and in addition to that, I think it's quite important that readers know what they're getting. And really, I think this is one of the crucial purposes of definition. You might see similarities between short story or a novella, for example, at least in how they're constructed, with a kind of unity of effect or theme or a limited number of characters or plots. But fundamentally, as a reader, you kind of want to know what you're going to be picking up. And I've kind of found it interesting in the last, 2 or 3 years, I've come across books which have sort of upended the sort of standard definition of what you might expect for a novel. So 2 books spring to mind in particular. One is Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders, well-known short story writer. And, if you've read that, you'll see just by flipping over the pages that it doesn't really look like a novel. It doesn't really look like prose writing. It comes across more as a play or a screenplay. And it has that as well. It has a kind of very large cast. And I've had lots of debates with friends about whether it's strictly a novel. I personally don't think it is. And I think it's been packaged as a novel so that it sells more copies, which it did do, although fewer copies than normal for a Booker winner. And another one which was sort of similar was Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout, can't remember, Stout I think. And that was actually a collection of short stories which had been published in multiple different publications, which had been packaged together. And that was intriguing because, you know, it wasn't a novel. Again, it was concrete kind of what looked like chapters, but were individual short stories. Sometimes, you know, changing time, changing character completely with very little through flow. It was more like Dubliners in a way, because it was set in one location. But, you know, it was packaged as a novel, and I'm guessing that was in order to sell more copies, because it's well known that short story collections and anthologies don't sell particularly well, which is why there's a dearth of literary agents accepting short stories and a kind of dearth of publishers if you're looking for a big publisher. That's changing a little bit, thankfully. But again, I think there is this sort of very heavy marketing emphasis on trying to make a book as popular among readers as possible, or enticing might be a better word. And I'm sort of okay with that. I think it's quite good to expand our definitions, although at the same time it can feel quite frustrating as a reader when you don't get what you sort of expect to a degree. And I don't mean in terms of plot, I really mean, I guess, in terms of form. What was also kind of intriguing as I was delving into this idea, particularly the tension between novel and novella, was that novella, in fact, was earlier on the scene than the novel. I kind of, for some reason, always assumed that the novel was a bit earlier, but the word novella itself, which comes from the Italian, novella, and the Latin novus or novus. It goes as far back as 1373 or something like that. 1353, with Boccaccio's Decameron, which is kind of a series of tales or fables, if you like. And then it kind of picks up in popularity around the kind of 18th and 19th centuries in Germany in particular, where they make a kind of quite a strong distinction with the novel, which is closer to our ideas of what the short story are, really, in terms of more reduced or less complex plots, fewer characters, fewer locations, a kind of turning point, or what they call a kind of, what do they call it? Vendepunkt, I think, which is a great word. And so there are these kind of, oh my gosh, sorry, this is, say hello to the dog. Hello. Helping me with my third video, yeah? Yes, good girl. This is my little 7-month-old puppy who doesn't like reading, and say hello. Oh, I'm just going to lick my arm instead. Okay. And yeah, so I mean, those are some of my thoughts on definitions, and those give you a kind of rough approximation in terms of length as well. I don't know if you can guess what the longest novel in the world is, or believed to be. It's by Marcel Proust, and it's called The Remembrance of Things. And at least according to Amazon, it's a hulking book of over 4,000 pages long. And I was trying to get a kind of conception of, oh, you're going to have to go down because you're too heavy, conception of how big a book that was. And this is the biggest book I have in my home. It's an absolute tome. It's 2,700 pages, and you can hear kind of that thin rice paper, a bit like a Bible. And as I said, that's 2,700 pages. So Proust's book, I guess, would be kind of an extra half again, if not a bit more. And so imagine kind of lugging that down, you'd end up looking a bit like, you know, Rambo within about a week. Well, there it is. That's the length of a novel, as well as short stories, flash fiction. I didn't mention microfiction, which is generally stuff under about 200 words. Quite a popular form as well. And Lydia Davis writes a lot of microfiction, and she's worth checking out. Okay, well, I'm going to leave it there, and in the famous words of Proust, au revoir.